Chapter 1241, At Daggers Drawn. After talking to Lu Shu, Zhong Yutong returned to the weapon refinery building to observe the situation. After all, since Lu Shu treated his students like animals, Zhong Yutong could not make sure if the students were distressed. However, he did not know that Lu Shu wanted the distress points. In fact, he began to think about how many distress points would he have obtained after the arrival of the other students from the 6 other cultivation colleges majoring in weapon refinery. Ouyang Lisheng was patrolling in the operations room. Actually, the world tide was not huge and hence the building project of the 7 broken pieces were not difficult. The difficult part was the precision. Precision was something Ouyang Lisheng had always been proud of. That included the stability of hands, eyes, and many of the masters of weapon refinery were much worse than Ouyang Lisheng. They could not drink, smoke or have bad practices. Those were the requirements of the master of weapon refinery in the Luniverse, as these items could affect one's hand stability, and was heavily prohibited. For the world tide, the 7 broken pieces must be closely pieced together. Therefore, Ouyang Lisheng did not have high hopes for the disciples in refining the world tide. However, after bringing up his request, Ouyang Lisheng suddenly realized that these disciples, including Zhong Yutong, had never put emphasis on scaffolding. They acted as though that was the easiest step in the refinery of the world tide. Then, on the next day, he saw how Zhong Yutong directed a group of people to bring over a huge pile of equipment that he did not recognize. The disciples seemed to be familiar with this equipment, but Ouyang Lisheng felt awkward to ask them about it. After assembling the equipment, Zhong Yutong looked at Ouyang Lisheng. "Master, how much error do you allow for our casting?" Ouyang Lisheng said, "Nothing more than 0.3 millimeters. To be honest, Ouyang Lisheng was the most impressed by the old King of God's ability to standardize the currency and measurements. 1 millimeter was 1,000 micrometers. Therefore, it meant that the room for error could not exceed 300 micrometers. The 7 pieces were combined and secured with marks, and the mark would not have any effects outside the 0.3 millimeter limit. Of course, the smaller the error, the more powerful and more secure the world tide was." After a long pause, Zhong Yutong said as he looked at Ouyang Lisheng, 0.3 millimeter, "Is this too big?" Ouyang Lisheng was dumbstruck. This was probably the difference between a machine and a human. Ouyang Lisheng and the rest had always been using their eyes for recognition and their hands to make improvements. Therefore, it was already very impressive if they could maintain an error of 0.3 millimeters. In the past, in the Luniverse, some of the masters liked to drink and could not ensure the precision by themselves. Therefore, they had to recruit talented disciples to do it and created a new career. Yet, it was extremely difficult for the error to be kept within 0.3 millimeters. Yet now, the equipment that Zhong Yutong was in contact with had at least 0.1 millimeter of error. In the document, whenever the words "fine processing" appeared, error that exceeded 0.3 millimeters meant that the product was a failure. Ouyang Lisheng felt extremely uncomfortable from enduring this. However, he did not want to admit defeat. He suddenly said, "This is the measurements for disciples. I was afraid that they cannot complete it, but it will be good if you guys can make it more precise." Then, Ouyang Lisheng wanted to look at the reactions of Zhong Yutong and the rest. However, Zhong Yutong suddenly frowned and said to the people beside him, "This is something instructed by the 9th Heavenly King. All of you must ensure the error is kept within 0.05 millimeters. This is a death order." Ouyang Lisheng thought, people on Earth are so arrogant. However, the people around Zhong Yutong smiled and said, "Rest assured, although we have very little time, we can keep the error down to 0.03 millimeters. In fact, ordinary people would think that 0.3 millimeters was an impressive precision." However, Zhong Yutong and the rest were at a position that determined that their standards were different from the ordinary industry. Ouyang Lisheng had stopped talking. He knew that if Zhong Yutong and the rest were being serious, if the equipment were brought to Luniverse, they could cause the loss of an entire industry. However, to be honest, it was too common for an industry to be lost overnight on Earth. As long as technological revolution continued, such things would always happen. Everyone had to ensure that they kept improving themselves in this era so that they would not be left behind. Ouyang Lisheng drew the diagram of the world tide and handed it to Zhong Yutong. Then, after 3 days, the first model was presented to Ouyang Lisheng. It took 4 days, faster than what he had expected. He had not even finished teaching the students how to carve the mark. Zhong Yutong anxiously waited for Ouyang Lisheng to check the model. Then, Ouyang Lisheng realized that the people were not bragging at all. The model was flawless. For some reasons, Ouyang Lisheng felt depressed. In the past, he depended on his skills to emerge victorious amongst the other disciples of his master. However, in the face of machines, his skills were no longer needed. Ouyang Lisheng adjusted his emotions and looked at Zhong Yutong. It meets the requirements, start working, the king is waiting. The world tide was finally going to be redeveloped. Zhang Weiyu and the rest had nothing to do and stayed outside the weapon refinery building every day. They wanted to obtain first-hand information when the world tide was completed. The world tide was an extremely powerful magical weapon for ordinary people. Yet to Zhang Weiyu and the rest, it was a form of worship that represented the gift of the old king of gods. In the weapon refinery building, it was very warm and everyone was wearing thick, protective clothing. The students were sweating profusely and began to regret their worship towards the 9th heavenly king. Zhong Yutong thought that this sense of hatred towards Lu Shu should not continue to accumulate within the students. He had to serve his purpose as the chief manager and therefore said to the students of the 7 cultivation colleges, "Why did the 9th heavenly king tire you out? His intention was for you guys to inherit the skills of weapon refinery. The times create heroes, you guys don't have much time left. Our battle with the Luniverse might happen anytime. Why don't you guys understand the 9th heavenly king's efforts yet? It was so difficult for him to find the weapons, and you guys are blaming him? You should be grateful for people who made great contributions." The students in front of Zhong Yutong were so guilty that they started tearing up. One of them wiped their tears and said, "It's our fault, our level of awareness is too low." Lu Shu, who was lying on the sofa and watching television in the apartment of Xingshu Road, suddenly sat up and gritted his teeth. "Zhong Yutong, we are at daggers drawn." Chapter 1242, The Start of a Great War. Lu Shu thought that this was strange. After he had risen to the master realm, why did he still encounter so many accidents when earning distress points? He saw how the 9th heavenly king was about to achieve a world-class image. Why was it so difficult for him to obtain distress points? Lu Shu was indignant. What on earth was happening? They did not allow him to remain on Earth. Lu Shu stood up from the sofa and walked towards the weapon refinery building. However, he was dumbstruck when he reached the door. It had only been a day since he last visited the place and there was a statue at the door? What the f***ck? He took a closer look at the statue and saw the words on the base, "You should be grateful for people who made great contributions." This statue is built in memory of the contribution by the 9th heavenly king for the inheritance of weapon refinery. Lu Shu's face turned black. He saw the handwriting of Ouyang Lisheng at the base. This statue was most probably built by Ouyang Lisheng. As a person who liked to suck up to others, he was definitely able to do something like this. After walking into the weapon refinery building, Lu Shu realized that everyone was looking at him with admiration. This made him extremely uncomfortable. He was just trying to earn some distress points. Was that wrong? Zhong Yutong walked towards Lu Shu and said after wiping his sweat, "I did my job well. Now, none of them blame you and are extremely grateful for you." Lu Shu almost flipped the table. He called Ouyang Lisheng over and asked, "Have you calculated how long it will take for the world tide to be built?" Ouyang Lisheng said while giving him a glance, "In the past, I thought it was a miracle if 9 could be built within a week. Now, I think we can aim for 120. Although the most time-consuming problem of building the foundations was addressed, the carving of the mark posed a restriction to the final yield. After all, this could not be replaced by machines. Lu Shu felt that the state of the Earth in the future would be such that people and technology worked hand in hand. It should be more balanced than the state in the Luniverse. 120 of those, Lu Shu gave it some deep thoughts. Now, there were over 50 Imperial Palace soldiers in the Weiwu army, it was sufficient. However, at this moment, there was suddenly a huge wave of energy on the Longmen Mountain. Lu Shu paused and thought, whatever was supposed to happen had happened. Lu Shu turned and said to Ouyang Lisheng, we have to be faster. The space pathway may close in 5 days. Ouyang Lisheng understood Lu Shu's instructions and returned to the weapon refinery laboratory. Everyone had to work without rest, they just had to last through these 5 days. During this period of time, everyone knew that the space pathway would open eventually, but everyone hoped that the day would not arrive so soon. That was because after this opening, there would definitely be casualties. When the space pathway opened, everyone knew that they had to face the things they were supposed to face. The commotion in the Longmen fortress gradually stopped as though it was the calm before the storm. Nobody dared to talk loudly. Everyone was busy working. It was not because their character had changed drastically overnight and became someone who did not like to talk. Rather, it was because they had felt the intense pressure. What surprised Lu Shu in these 5 days was that there were many people waiting at the entrance of the space pathway in North America. When the space pathway opened, they charged into Earth and seized all the resources they could see, including humans. This did not feel like something that was done by an organization. It felt more like a school of sharks who swam towards something after smelling blood. The slave owners of the Luniverse were there to eat people. Lu Shu caught a slave owner directly and handed him over to Zhong Yutong for interrogation. However, what surprised him was that they did not interact with each other. The only reason was because they obtained the information about Earth and was very aware that the practitioners on Earth were much weaker than those in the Luniverse. Someone intentionally spread the news that the Earth was weak and used the population to attract the slave owners. However, they hid the truth about how the Black Feather Army had been destroyed by the Earth. There were also rumors that although the Black Feather Army had killed 20,000 soldiers, they were killed by Duanmu Huangqi as their energy had been depleted. Nobody could prove that. Duanmu Huangqi would not admit that she had been defeated and 20,000 soldiers of the Black Feather Army had died in vain. The Heavenly Network wanted to stay out of this matter initially. However, they did not have a choice as they could not allow the slave owners of the Luniverse to steal resources like that. Therefore, Lu Shu made a trip personally. When Lu Shu arrived, blood was everywhere outside the space pathway in North America. The people who had stolen resources returned to the Luniverse as someone had recognized Lu Shu, the leader of the Weiwu army. Lu Shu, who was rumored to be killed by Duanmu Huangqi in the legends, was not dead. There was an error in the report. To be honest, Lu Shu's fame was much more useful in the Luniverse than on Earth. On Earth, the 9th Heavenly King's identity was saved by those he had saved in the jail. In the Luniverse, the name of the owner of the Weiwu army was obtained by killing others. 2 of his identities represented 2 different attitudes. When the people from the Luniverse who just entered to steal resources found out about his identity, they were afraid to say anything. They knew that the 20,000 soldiers of Duanmu Huangqi had been killed, so they would definitely not escape unscathed. Then, the outcome was that although there was nobody guarding the space pathway in North America, none of the slave owners from the Luniverse dared to enter. The title of Good Guy 9th Heavenly King once again spread overseas and upgraded to become the guardian of the people. If nothing went wrong, it was extremely difficult for Lu Shu to obtain a large amount of trauma and distress points overseas. On the 5th morning, Zhang Weiyu and the rest returned to their rooms and wore their armor, took their weapons and waited quietly in the courtyard. Every day, the Weiwu army lurked in the canteen and some stole drinks. After Lu Shu scolded them, they replied and said that he punished them rightly and shouted in pain after being beaten up. The soldiers of the Heavenly Network looked at this from afar. They realized that when the Weiwu army wore their armor, they instantly changed from the hooligans to real warriors. The Heavenly Network had encountered a great war before. However, as compared to the Weiwu army, their experience was insufficient and they had killed too few people. Be it the strife in the North region or killing the Black Feather army from the North region to the Earth, the blood and fire that the Weiwu army had experienced were way more than that of the Heavenly Network. When the Weiwu army walked on the limestone brick road, they were at their peak. However, the army that was sufficiently terrifying would only listen to Lu Shu. The entire Longmen fortress was silent. The soldiers of the Heavenly Network were paying attention to the Weiwu army. Many of them were very envious of the Weiwu army as they had known that after the space pathway to the Luniverse opened, only the Weiwu army would advance to the Luniverse. The Heavenly Network had to guard the Earth with all its might. Lu Shu had yet to appear because he was waiting for the World Tide. Chapter 1243, Reappearance of the Imperial Dragon Soldiers. After 5 painful days, the weapon refinery disciples gathered around Ouyang Lisheng with high concentration. Over the past 5 days, they had less than 1 hour to sleep and eat. After they dozed off, they had to continue creating the World Tide. Now, the hard times were over, and the good times were about to begin. They were about to witness Ouyang Lisheng create the signs and turn dead metal into a living thing. They would see how Ouyang Lisheng induced a miraculous transformation. Ouyang Lisheng took the 7 parts of the World Tide. He rapidly used a hammer to create the signs on the 7 parts, as if the skills were at his fingertips. Ouyang Lisheng said, "Without the pattern, magical weapons are dead, like how humans will die if they do not have any vital channels." After he created another pattern, he continued. "These signs are like the writings we have learned. There are specific patterns to be followed. But the World Tide is different. I was the one who created the 7 signs." It is not an exaggeration to say that Songjia, 1, created words. Then, Ouyang Lisheng looked at his disciples. "But you must understand that the difference between these signs and words is that words are complete. You simply have to learn what your forefathers have left behind. But there are many gaps in terms of signs. There is a lot of space for creativity. Don't grow complacent after mastering a few signs. You must explore the vast world." At this moment, the weapon refinery disciples linked the image of Master Refiner with Ouyang Lisheng. Typically, Ouyang Lisheng was an expert at currying favor. Either that, or he was a harsh workshop owner. He did not seem like a master at all. The moment Ouyang Lisheng created a sign on the 7th part, the 7 scattered parts of the World Tide moved and pieced themselves together, forming a sword. Red lines flowed on the sword like magma. The signs were like riverbeds that were dry, but now surged with water. At this moment, the magma in the signs looked as if they were going to overflow, like a dam about to burst. Ouyang Lisheng did not panic. He dunked the sword into the water tank beside him. The flames sizzled and were extinguished. Ouyang Lisheng took up the World Tide. He silently thought about it. The casting of this intricate weapon was very tough. The errors were so small that they could not be seen with the naked eye. When he cast the World Tide in the past, this had never happened. But he had said that the more tightly joined together the World Tide was, the more threatening it would become. This time, something Ouyang Lisheng did not expect would happen had happened when the signs joined together. The magma almost overflowing meant that the sword itself almost could not endure the threat posed when the signs joined together. How dangerous! It was almost unable to contain it. Signs were created on each and every piece of the World Tide. In the end, Lu Shu was presented with 144 World Tides. This was many more than Ouyang Lisheng had created back then. The weapon refinery disciples seemed lost in thought. Only the professional refiners, who had the right to create teaching materials, seemed to be in anguish. From today onwards, they had to stand at the same standing line as these students from the cultivation colleges. But although they could not accept the fact that these students could do what they could do, they did not feel that it was a pity. The professional refiners spent day and night researching metal materials and their reactions at the laboratories in the capital. Did they do this for themselves? No. They did it for the prosperity and flourishing of the heavenly network. They had reached this goal. What they needed to do was start on a new journey and complain here. Ouyang Lisheng looked at Lu Shu and smiled obsequiously. Great Lord, I have fulfilled my mission. The world tides have been created. Lu Shu looked at the world tides. After they had cooled, there were 7 gold dragons surging through each world tide. The black and gold complemented each other well. The next moment, all the weapon refinery disciples watched as the world tides flew into the sky. Ripples were formed in the sky and flew out. It was as if black dragons were shouting in front of them. The sword landed on the ground in front of Zhang Weiyu and the rest. This produced an ear-piercing sound when the sword came into contact with the ground. Lu Shu led Ouyang Lisheng and stepped into a void to arrive in front of Zhang Weiyu. He looked at Zhang Weiyu, who was controlling his excitement. What are you waiting for? Take your sword. The world tides flew into the hands of Zhang Weiyu and the rest. Zhang Weiyu looked at Lu Shu in shock. This world tide is even more convenient than the previous one. Of course, Ouyang Lisheng was not willing to admit that this was the result of technology. He cleared his throat. Ahem. The master refiner can improve too. The sword in your hands is the world tide 2.0. Lu Shu was speechless. He looked at Ouyang Lisheng. Don't blindly give names after looking at the objects on Earth. A perfectly good name has been destroyed by you. Just call it the world tide. The Great Lord is wise. The Great Lord is great. Ouyang Lisheng submissively sucked up to Lu Shu. Zhang Weiyu mustered up the courage and suddenly asked, I have a doubt. I already have an answer, but I have no way to confirm it. Great Lord, are you able to give me an answer today? Lu Shu calmly looked at Zhang Weiyu. Go ahead. We have heard of Lord Ouyang Lisheng. He is the craftsman of the old King of Gods. Almost all the weapons from the palace of the King of Gods have his name carved on them, said Zhang Weiyu. But I have also heard that he only created weapons for the old King of Gods, as the old King of Gods had saved his life. Ouyang Lisheng immediately snapped out of his bootlicker character. He grew arrogant. You know quite a lot. Lu Shu thought about it. He had wanted to tell Zhang Weiyu about this. Why did he not recognize Corpse Dog? But Lu Shu was curious. When did you start having this doubt? Lord Arcane told me something interesting. Zhang Weiyu said, when the old King of Gods carried Lord Teartricker back to the palace of the King of Gods, Lord Teartricker was still in her swaddling clothes. That night, the old King of Gods sang Twinkle Twinkle Little Star to Lord Teartricker while she fell asleep. This is exactly the same as your heavenly vision. Lord Arcane also said that he had never seen a face as kind as yours. Back then, he understood the reason we risked life and limb to follow you. At this moment, Zhang Weiyu's tone had changed. It was as if the answer in his heart had been confirmed. Lu Shu suddenly laughed. Last night, he dreamed that Teartricker passed through an empty street while carrying him. He was crying in his box. Teartricker stopped and carried Lu Shu in her arms. She softly sang Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. It was as if fate had come one full circle. Lu Shu quietly stood in front of everyone. He looked at Zhang Weiyu and the rest. He said, these few days, I have been thinking that the name Weiwu Army doesn't sound nice. Thus, from today onwards, you will be called the Imperial Dragon Soldiers. Zhang Weiyu knelt down on the ground. He buried his head in the shadows of his helmet. He cried. Welcome back, my king. Behind him, the Imperial Dragon soldiers all knelt down. The sound of the armor rubbing against one another sounded like angry shouting. The veins on their necks were jumping. "Welcome back, my king." Their voices caused the entire Longmen fortress to tremble. Chapter 1244, We Are Willing to Advance. When the soldiers of the Heavenly Network heard the deafening cries, they looked at one another helplessly. They did not know what had happened in the Luniverse. They did not know about Lu Shu's identity, or how much of a threat he was. They were simply shocked that the loyalty of the Weiwu army had exceeded their expectations. This was probably the reason the Weiwu army could never fully integrate with the Heavenly Network. They were only loyal to Lu Shu. If the Heavenly Network was made up of bandits, then it would be fine. It was the same no matter whether they were loyal to their head or the assistant head. But it was a pity that the Heavenly Network was not made up of bandits. Such distinctions were not allowed within the Heavenly Network either. Nie Ting was not excluding the Weiwu army. Furthermore, Lu Shu also understood this. No one in the outside world knew that the Weiwu army had changed their name. They were no longer called the Weiwu army. They had inherited their previous name of the Imperial Dragon soldiers. The armor that Zhang Weiyu and the rest were wearing were like a city wall surrounding Lu Shu. The soldiers from the Heavenly Network were silent. This was the 9th Heavenly King. He had an extremely loyal and strong army under his control. They did not know that Zhang Weiyu and the rest had waited for far too long. For 23 years, they had been looking forward to this moment every single day. They shouted, "Welcome back, my king," but they were looking forward to their own return. They looked forward to the day they could return to their position beside the throne. Every single Imperial Dragon soldier walked under the King of Gods. They represented the king's intentions. It was their most brilliant moment. Zhang Weiyu had experienced the days and nights of suffering, and the pain when he lost his comrades. Now, it was time for him to enjoy life once again. No wonder he started to cry. If someone had protected a dream alone for 23 years, and the dream was suddenly fulfilled, they would probably be the same. There were people who had given up or killed themselves due to poverty. When Lu Shu first arrived in the Luniverse, one of Zhang Weiyu's old friends had taken his own life. This period had been extremely lonely. They waited in the night, not knowing when light would ascend upon them once again. But they did not complain or regret it. Even if they died the most brutal death, they would not hold a grudge. Their loyalty was not unfounded. Their loyalty had experienced many tests, and was eventually proven by time. To be honest, if it were not for the fact that Nie Ting and Shi Xuejin understood Lu Shu very well, they would not allow anyone else to bring such a dangerous enemy to their territory. Even if they could not defeat the army, they would stall them outside the country. The soldiers of the Heavenly Network looked around. They wanted to see how Nie Ting and Shi Xuejin reacted, but realized that they were standing in the field, as if it were none of their business. They were observing all of this. At this moment, the soldiers of the Heavenly Network finally heaved a sigh of relief. If Heavenly King Nie was not panicking, why should they? Zhang Weiyu and the rest of the Imperial Palace soldiers stood up and walked in front of Lu Shu. They each pulled out the world tide that belonged to them. They slashed the world tide across the palm of their hands in one uniform action. The blood in their bodies flowed into the signs of the world tide. This was the process by which the world tide recognized their owners. Each world tide belonged to one Imperial Palace soldier. Suddenly, all their arms trembled at the same time. The world tide in their hands broke into 7 pieces and flew to the sky. The pieces of the world tide surged in the sky like a tide. They were like black clouds covering the sky. The broken pieces arranged themselves in a strange formation. It was as if the black tide would surge to wherever the enemy was. Lu Shu looked at the sky and remembered what Zhang Weiyu had said, the swords like a tide that could attack masters. Nie Ting knew that once the world tide appeared, things were growing serious. But he was not afraid. He asked Shi Xuejin, is the heavenly network able to create such weapons now? Shi Xuejin slowly said, we currently have no need to create such things. If the enemy is from the Luniverse, this weapon will still be useless. But if the enemy is from Earth, we will be able to defeat them easily even without this. Thus, to the heavenly network, the world tide was of little value for now. Most importantly, they had to continue increasing the strength of their soldiers. Furthermore, the heavenly network did not have many rank 1 experts that could use the world tide. Most importantly, Shi Xuejin added on, we do not have the materials. That young man controls everything. Niating said, you're right. We have discovered a pattern in the opening of the space pathway. Shi Xuejin looked at the report in his hands and said, the space pathway will next open in 40 days. Furthermore, it will open more and more frequently. It will be completely open after about 1 year. Do you think that Lu Shu will stay in the Luniverse and not return? Niating asked. Don't you understand him? He will definitely return. Shi Xuejin said, we should be concerned about our own affairs. Niating was calm. He did not speak. Although the disaster in North America had been resolved by Lu Shu, if the space pathway completely opened, they could predict that a large number of people from the Luniverse would secretly come to the Earth. Then they would severely impact the stable order on Earth. It is time to organize a meeting among all the practitioners on Earth. We have to form a line of defense against the Luniverse. If Lu Shu resolves the problem, then it will be fine. But if he does not, we have to make long-term plans, said Shi Xuejin. Niating and Shi Xuejin had discussed this with Lu Shu. When the space pathway opened again, they would go to the Luniverse. They did not have any other goals than to help Lu Shu fight. But before that, the Earth had to form an alliance to face the hidden threat. In the past, the Heavenly Network rejected such alliances. After all, alliances were used by overseas practitioner organizations to cheat them. But now, the Heavenly Network could not continue this stance. The greater their power, the greater their responsibility. The Heavenly Network had to stand up for the entire Earth. Of course, Niating and Shi Xuejin were not people who tried to get along with everyone. This was simply a process that established the Heavenly Network's position in the entire world. At that moment, Lu Shu looked at Niating and Shi Xuejin. It was as if there was chemistry between them. Lu Shu faced the Imperial Dragon soldiers and said, this time, we might not be able to return. It is not an exaggeration to say that we might have a 10% chance of surviving. Those who want to stay behind can fall out now. Zhang Weiyu calmly said, we are willing to advance. The Imperial Dragon soldiers shouted in unison. We are willing to advance. Lu Shu laughed. Then we shall go forth. For those who survive, we will go for a drink together. At that moment, saying anything else would be unnecessary. One person had decided to go to another world and face the most dangerous enemy in order to end something. Another group of people did not care whether the path ahead of them was dangerous or not, in order to follow this person. Chapter 1245, Blood Ritual Flags. This time, not only did the Imperial Dragon soldiers follow Lu Shu to the Luniverse, but also Chen Zuan, Chang Qiuqiao and Lu Xiaoyu. After wearing the armor that shook mountains, both Chang Qiuqiao and Chen Zuan walked proudly in front of the troops. The door of the Longmen Fortress opened and all the soldiers of the Heavenly Network stood on the fortress, watching Lu Shu and the rest progress into the space pathway. For some reason, everyone felt a wave of strength from these troops. Lu Xiaoyu tossed a box onto the fortress and it landed in front of Niating. Shi Xuejin bent over and opened it. It was a box full of refresher fruits. This was the gift that Lu Xiaoyu and Lu Shu left behind for the Heavenly Network. They had to protect it such that the energy did not leak, so as to ensure that the Heavenly Network could save many Zhao Yongchens in the future. As he saw the box of fruits, Zhao Yongchen remembered the conversation he had with Lu Shu on that rainy night. He suddenly shouted at Lu Shu, "Sage, this trip." Then, he was broken off by Lu Shu. "Shut up, I will be able to return." "Oh." Zhao Yongchen stopped talking. From Zhao Yangchen's distress, plus 666. Lu Shu looked at the city gates of the Longmen Fortress while standing in front of the space pathway. The soldiers of the Heavenly Network looked at them from above the city gates. Lu Shu knew that too many people would be awaiting his return. Suddenly, a black spot moved quickly towards him. Lu Shu raised his hand and the entire troop of Imperial Dragon soldiers suddenly stopped in front of him. Nobody asked anything. Lu Shu told them to wait, so they had to wait quietly. 5,000 Imperial Dragon soldiers wearing armor stood quietly on the spot with the red tassels on their helmets flowing in the wind. This scene was too astonishing, even the soldiers of the Heavenly Network were shocked. It felt as though they drank a bottle of aged wine in winter. The soldiers of the Heavenly Network on the city gate looked behind themselves. The black spot in the sky grew in size, and everyone eventually saw each other's faces. The person who was wearing flowy white clothes was Coral from the deities. Lu Xiaoyu rolled her eyes. Why was Coral doing this? Coral sped up and landed beside Lu Shu. She smiled and said, "I managed to catch up. I will follow you anywhere you go." The Imperial Dragon soldiers looked in silence, especially Zhang Weiyu and the rest. Chen Zuan, who was beside them, smiled and said to Lu Shu, "Brother Shu, if both Lu Xiaoyu and Coral were in a room and the room caught fire, who will you save first?" Lu Shu looked at Chen Zuan in astonishment. The other Imperial Dragon soldiers also looked at Chen Zuan. Li Haitan looked as though he was looking at a good friend, while Zhang Weiyu almost covered his face. He was worried that they would lose a member before they reached the Luniverse. This must be the so-called death before gaining victory. Lu Shu slapped Chen Zuan's head. "I will put out the fire first." "What F*** King fire? What fire? How dare you set fire to the room? Don't you dare set fire in the future." Chen Zuan almost cried from the beating. He was only making an assumption, he did not set the fire. The mood suddenly changed from one that was solemn to one that was cheerful. From Chen Zuan's distress, plus 999. Lu Shu roared angrily at Zhang Weiyu, "Set off." As he said that, Lu Shu stepped into the space pathway first, and Zhang Weiyu, who was behind him, took out a black flag that had big red words sewn on it. The Heavenly Network could not see clearly on the city gates. Someone asked softly, "What is written on the flag? Why did the 9th Heavenly King beat Chen Zuan?" "I can't see what is on the flag either, but I know that the 9th Heavenly King had beaten Chen Zuan up because he deserved it." "Hold on, I have a binoculars." Someone whipped out a binoculars and froze when he saw what was written on the flag. "Escape poverty and make a fortune." "What, escape poverty and make a fortune? Why are you saying this? Stop speaking your mind," mumbled someone. The person who was holding on to the binoculars was speechless. Someone else wrote this on the flag. The words on the flag are, "Escape poverty and make a fortune." The gloomy mood that was originally present suddenly disappeared. What the F***CK was, "Escape poverty and make a fortune." Could the 9th Heavenly King be more serious when designing a flag? Lu Xiaoyu asked someone to customize the flag on her way to deliver the bear meat and refresher fruit to Uncle Li. The person who was tasked to customize the flag was stunned. They had seen pet hospitals sew "Save my dog's life" on their flag, and had seen matchmaking agencies sew "Rejuvenation" on their flag. However, it was the first time they saw a battle flag with the words, "Escape poverty and make a fortune." The lady in charge of the sewing asked Lu Xiaoyu if she was going to the countryside to help the poor, and Lu Xiaoyu said no. However, both the Heavenly Network and the lady sewing the flag had underestimated the capability of the flag in the Luniverse. People guarded the exit of the space pathway. Like in North America, a large number of slave owners gathered and wanted to take advantage of the situation. The news of the North American pathway being invaded had yet to spread, and the slave owners were about to enter the space pathway. Then, the next moment, they suddenly saw a young man walk out from the space pathway, and he was smiling at them. His white teeth made him look as though he wanted to eat them. Then, soon after, the Imperial Palace soldiers wearing black armor that shook mountains ran out, and the soldier in front was holding onto the flag that read, "Escape poverty and make a fortune." The slave owners panicked. "Isn't this the flag of the Weiwu army? Didn't someone say that Duanmu Huangqi killed all of them? What's happening? The young man should be the owner of the Weiwu army." They did not know that the Imperial Dragon soldiers had made a comeback. If they had known, they would be even more fearful. Although they were unaware of why the Weiwu army were all alive, it was the truth. Since they saw Lu Shu and the Weiwu army, that meant that the people who spread the news in the Luniverse were lying. Instantly, hundreds of slave owners turned and fled. They had no confidence of winning against the Weiwu army, as the 20,000 soldiers of the Black Feather army had lost. The reputation of Weiwu army in the Luniverse was extremely influential. Before Lu Shu made his command, the commander of the Imperial Dragon soldiers coldly said, "Follow and kill a batch, stain the ritual flags with blood." To serve as a warning. The voice was spread from the mark in the helmet. Lu Shu did not stop him as he had already handed the right to others. He should not question the commander. Li Liang wanted to awaken the bloodthirstiness of the Imperial Dragon soldiers with people's lives. Lu Shu did not speak. He would not regret it as he was there to kill.
What does it mean to be happy? 'Cause it looks like we all don't know. Glass half full or empty, man, we just put 'em on the show. Try to look to the heavens to tell us things that we beg to know. Like, what did this all mean? There's no time.